Yan. Live na tayo. Try natin gawin meta to. Ayan, Monday. Kamusta po? Good Monday po. Pag-usapan natin ang latest sa Philippine politics at saka ano yung mga implication yan. Just a while ago, may nakita akong update from family back in Baguio. Mukhang andyan yata si Lenny, Vice President Lenny. Mukhang meron siyang campaign dyan. Mukhang magandang reception kay Vice President Lenny Robredo dyan sa Baguio. And actually, I'm not very surprised. Totoo naman na Baguio is, of course, kind of within the solid north area, supposedly. But it's also a very middle-class society and highly educated society. Of course, I'm very proud of coming from Baguio. And I think, as far as Vice President Lenny Robredo is concerned, yung kanyang approach, which is policy-based, compassion-based, steady leadership kind of signaling, ay medyo gumagana, especially among the middle classes, middle of the middle classes dito sa Pilipinas. So I'm not surprised, to see na medyo magandang reception kay Vice President Lenny Robredo dyan sa Baguio, which is supposed to be part of Solid North, And of course, historically, alam natin na Baguio was a beneficiary, or at least one of the few places during the Marcos dictatorship that actually saw some significant infrastructure development among others, including, if I'm not mistaken, Marcos Highway mismo, di ba? While, of course, other parts of the country, especially Mindanao, were heavily devastated during time na yan, yung giyera, doon yung panahon ng martial law. And of course, the situation in Manila and other major cities was not also significantly good over time, And 1982 na, baksak na yung economy ng Pilipinas. But Baguio was one of the few places that actually did pretty well in the 70s and 80s. And of course, after nung nangyaring earthquake sa Baguio nung 1991, andun ako noon. I was just a baby, but I still remember it kasi traumatic yung experience. Unfortunately, yung infrastructure ng Baguio ay medyo nasira-sira. So, of course, there's some sort of nostalgia na Baguio used to be better, etc., etc. And of course, that kind of feeds into the pro-Marcosian, supposedly golden old days kind of narrative. But at the same time, marami rin middle class sa Baguio. It's a very literate society, community. Mataas yung level ng political discussions. I can say that, of course, coming from Baguio, tsaka yung mga discussions na meron ako with friends, colleagues, cousins, among others. So, I think yung positioning ni Lenny Robredo is something that appeals to significant number of people, including Ilocanos in Baguio. So it's not very true that people will necessarily vote along ethno-linguistic lines. So I think demographics, there's also an element of socioeconomic class. There's an element of exposure to critical thinking, to liberalism, and also, of course, there's an element of historical experience and historical memory, both true and also based on nostalgia. So lahat ng mga elements na yan nandyan, Nonetheless, gusto kong balikan kasi meron akong column tomorrow with Philippine Daily Inquirer on ISKO Moreno. I know may mga tao. Kanina kasi nag-trending na naman si ISKO since last week. Nag-trending na naman siya. Not necessarily, of course, for the best reasons, at least from the point of view of the critics. And we know that Twitter has been quite hostile to the ISKO camp over the past 2 months or so. And in a way, perhaps Twitter played a role in terms of the split between the Lenny and ISKO Moreno camp. Especially yung pinapa-resign na si ISKO. But now, clearly, nakita natin na si ISKO is positioning himself now openly as the candidate of the administration and President Duterte. So in light of that, because it has some clear electoral implications, of course, for the Bongbong Marcos camp also, which was hoping to be the candidate of the administration. At of course, in one way or another, sa tingin ko, actually, this could benefit also the opposition, especially Lenny Robredo. So, as much as, some people are, attacking ISKO for supposedly swinging too hard to the other side from a much more progressive position a few months ago, and definitely in the first 2 years at least of his mayoral stint. Well, at the same time, you have to understand should ISKO become the bet of President Duterte, then that will have some huge implications for the elections. And as I mentioned a while in the previous Meta Live, just in case kung ma-disqualified si Marcos, again, it's possibility, not probability yet. Then this could become an ISKO versus Lenny kind of a showdown. And as far as President Duterte is concerned, if maging candidate niya talaga si ISKO, then, that's gonna make things a little bit tricky for the Bongbong Marcos camp. Kaya, again, this is very rough, kind of a statistical breakdown I look at is this. Kasi, tignan nyo ngayon, based on authoritative surveys, SWS among others, parang 45 to 50%, no, yung range ni Bongbong Marcos. And then Lenny is like 18 to 20 plus, no? So medyo halos doble, no? Yung numbers ni Marcos. But if ISKO surges because of backing of the administration and support of President Duterte among others, then this could actually narrow the field, no? And we're looking potentially at the 30-35, 20-25, 20-25 breakdown, no? Whereby more or less between 75 to 90% of the prospective votes goes to 3 candidates. So in that sense, actually, the race could become much, much, much more fluid, no? In ways that I think will make it more exciting, more interesting, and puts more pressure on the candidates to prove themselves, yung metal ng kanilang leadership, at saka more emphasize yung kanilang policy positions and all. And, in fairness to Mayor ISKO, he can talk about a lot of projects he has been accomplishing or has already accomplished over the past few years. So yun, sa tingin ko, dun sa mga opposition na, 'di ba? Parang actually in a way dapat i-welcome nila, no? Potential rise of a third candidate if this kind of narrows the field. Bakit kamo? Because there's an overlap between yung base na pwede attract ni ISKO at saka yung base na so far medyo na-attract kay Bongbong Marcos. And especially if yung disqualification case ni Marcos ay medyo mag-intensify or maging lalong malala, no, yung shadow of doubt, no, yung bahit ng duda dun sa viability ng Bongbong Marcos campaign, I won't be surprised, no, na maraming BBMers ngayon na hindi ganun ka-solid actually could go to ISKO. Because again, if you look at Pulse Asia and other surveys, very clear na ISKO is one of the top second preferred candidates. And base sa positioning nila, or at least this is the messaging that Lito Banayo and others have been pushing, is that parang ISKO has become more and more palatable to the demographics and base dun sa other side, just as ISKO has been losing support among the opposition side. So if parang may nakita akong survey earlier, I think this was Pulse Asia earlier this year, na if this were a 4-way race among Pacquiao, Bongbong Marcos, Sara, and ISKO actually would be in a very strong position. So when Lenny decided to join the race, parang nawala na yung plan na yan, no? And Lenny has begun to kind of consolidate a solid base, no, of around 1/5 of the votes, no, on the side of the opposition and center, left, and progressive side. So that leaves ISKO in a position whereby the best way for him to actually bump up is to move to the right. So essentially, he has been increasingly being boxed out of the center, left, and left. Yes, it's true na walang direct correspondence yung right-left politics in the Philippines, but I'm trying to simplify it for heuristic purposes. So mukhang habang nahihirapan si ISKO to position himself dun sa more left progressive opposition side, nagpo-position sila to gain numbers on the other side, and this is where many na hindi solid pro Marcos BBM, meron siyang solid probably 15-20%. But dun sa 45-50%, marami dyan ay, my sense is, a huge number of them are actually going to be comfortable also voting for ISKO, especially if ISKO becomes the candidate of the administration, if ISKO gets the backing and machinery, if yung bahid na duda dun sa disqualification case kay Marcos ay hindi mawawala, no? Within the short span of time. So kung magdadrag itong issue until February, etc., it's potential. Kasi nakita natin in the past kay Grace po, di ba? Umakyat ito sa Supreme Court way beyond yung initial estimation nung duration eh. So who knows? This time it could also go there. At nakikita natin petitions are coming right and left and attacking the Marcos camp from different angles. Moral turpitude ba? Or kung hindi moral turpitude, nagbayad ba ng fine, no? Kung hindi nagbayad ng fine, or kung nagbayad ng fine, if it has something to do with tax issues, dapat ba perpetual disqualification? So, the petitions are coming right and left. So, if parang mag-intensify itong issue ng disqualification kay Marcos, this is where ISKO camp is trying to come in and pick up the numbers, no? So, I won't be surprised if Marcos goes from 45-50 down to around 35-30. ISKO bumps up from around 30 into 15% to 25-30%. And then Lenny could keep it at around 20-25%. And if, let's say, some other candidates na medyo ang base nila is to the opposition or center-left, then they rally behind Lenny. Then, again, this is very rough statistical kind of a projection. But you can look at the scenario whereby 35-25, 20-25. Ganun yung magiging laban. So it could tighten up in that case. Now, even if, let's say, Bongbong Marcos is still in the race and there's no disqualification, etc., sa kanya talaga, ultimately, which is, for me, more probable than not, diba? So this is where the race can get very, very interesting, whereby, essentially, what mangyari dito is, so Marcos, of course, is more appealing to the right, conservative, some would say reactionary side, according to critics, or at least people of authoritarian nostalgia, etc., or want decisive leadership. Although Bongbong Marcos himself doesn't give a kind of an authoritarian aura, no? Pag titignan mo naman si Bongbong Marcos. So Bongbong Marcos is kind of cornering the more right-leaning side of the political spectrum. Lenny is getting a huge part of the opposition, center-left, progressive side. Pero dito sa gitna si ISKO no? So ISKO has been pushed out a little bit from the left. He's going to the right, and he'll try to get numbers from Marcos. And one area whereby I think ISKO can make huge gain is yung mga supporters ni Sara na hindi natuwa na si Sara ay naging vice presidential tandem na lang ni Marcos. In fact, kung maalala nyo, di ba nagkaroon tayo ng Meta Alive from Comelec mismo nun. And I think nakita niyan, di ba? Dumaan tayo dun sa mga supporters ni Sara and sabi nila, hindi pa huli ang lahat, etc., etc. So hindi sila satisfied, hindi sila happy na nag-VP na lang siya, no? And by the way, she's just a candidate. It's not even clear whether she can defeat Tito Soto, and let's see, malakas din sila Kiko and and the other vice presidential candidates. So hindi pa tapos ang laban. So it's possible na ISKO can get some of the supporters of Sara Duterte if ma-endorse siya ni President Duterte, no? And of course, with the machinery and support and all, and ISKO is attracting support from many quarters, from big business, potentially from the administration. And kung titignan mo yung campaign ni ISKO is very interesting because parang meron kang, of course, Lito Banayo, Vince Dizon, stalwarts of the Duterte administration. At the same time, meron ka rin Action Demokratiko, meron ka rin Samira Gotok. So, it's kind of kaya nga dun sa upcoming article ko, I kind of compare him to Macron, right? Again, I know I get bashed when I do that by some people on certain side and all. Basahin nyo yung article ko tomorrow, makikita nyo yung parallelisms na pinapoint out ko dyan. Because if you look at the en marche of Macron, the kind of movement party he made almost overnight ahead of his 2017 presidential elections, it's kind of like a hodgepodge, no? So people with more technocratic, conservative side, with people with much more leftist, progressive side na hindi natawa sa mga establishment parties, including the Socialist Party. So all of them came together, no? So titingnan mo, medyo ganun din yung, I mean, it's not exact, of course, correspondence, pero may pagkaganon din yung campaign ni ISKO. Kasi meron ka Action Demokratiko, which is a very progressive party, no? Andun sila Vico. And then, of course, Grace po will most likely also come out, guns blazing and supporting ISKO later on. Grace po, no? And ISKO recently said na he actually voted for Grace po in 2016 elections, not President Duterte, no? So you have Grace po, right? Another centrist candidate in the last election, centrist liberal candidate, and I think ISKO is kind of positioning himself there. But now, because medyo box out siya dito sa other side, I think he's listening to some of his advisors who are saying, well, our best chance is to become the admin's bet and then essentially elbow out Marcos and pick up some numbers there and push it up. So yun yung nagiging strategy ng ISKO camp. Again, we're not passing any kind of moral or value-based judgment here. We're looking at this dun sa perspective ng political strategy, no? At saka yung mga tactical adjustments na nakikita natin sa mga iba't ibang camps. So if you're, if you don't like a race kumbaga kung saan predetermined na or yung clear front runner, yun na yun, well, actually you have to welcome a much more competitive scenario kung saan meron ka at least 3 candidates, no? Na medyo malakas-lakas, no? Na cornering between a fifth to a third of the votes. So that's the scenario that I'm looking at if especially if ISKO successfully pulls off itong hindi lang endorsement na verbal, no, but full support from the administration. But at the same time, nakita niyo si ISKO tries to also emphasize na kung tuloy yung drug war pero andun yung human rights. West Philippine Sea maging tougher siya on China. So he's still also, extending some olive branch to some of the people on the center left. As after all, meron siyang progressive allies and all. Vico Soto, potentially because of Action Democratico. Samira Gotok is still there. So yun yung mga elements na dapat titignan natin. Okay, anyways, so nakikita nyo na, okay, hindi tayo Madam Auring dito, hindi tayo Marites, no? So hindi tayo nagbibigay ng definitive na projection or forecast. Ang ginagawa po natin dito is tinitignan natin yung snapshot ng race and tinitignan natin how small movements or more than small movements can have ripple effect sa race. So in short, to recap, yung mga late sa class, mamaya may tanong na naman sa, Sir, paano si ISKO? Sir, ganyan. Oh, yan. And recap na tayo. So to recap, gusto niyo medyo malinis ang cut natin ngayon. First time lang tayo. Okay, anyways, saan tayo? Okay, so recap. So in short, ang sinasabi po natin dito is this. Ay, medyo na-conscious na. Wait. Okay, in short, ang sinasabi natin po dito is this. ISKO Moreno potentially emerging as the bet of the administration actually could blow the race wide open in ways that could actually favor the Lenny camp in certain ways and actually work against dun sa interest ng Bongbong Marcos camp, because the Marcos strategy was to become the candidate of administration, box out everyone else dun sa side na yan of the political spectrum and corner huge numbers, no, dun sa mga prospective voters. But now ISKO from the center is a little bit moving to center right on certain issues to get the support of President Duterte. That could put him in a position to get some of the non-solid voters in the BBM camp. Including dyan, potentially, ay yung mga supporters ni Sara na dismayado na hindi siya tumakbong presidente. And if the father endorses ISKO, they may be open to support ISKO instead. Not to mention some of the solid South machinery could actually rally behind ISKO sa Mindanao kung saan mahina si ISKO comparatively. Kasi malakas siya dito sa NCR and Luzon and malakas siya relatively sa Visayas. So this is where the race can be more interesting because ISKO's numbers can pick up from around 30-15%, push up to 20-25%. Marcos' numbers could come down a little bit from around 45-50% to 35% probably, or 30%. And then Lenny, if she keeps her momentum, perhaps she can corner between 20 to 25%. So you can have a scenario whereby 35, 25, 25, or something around that breakdown ang mangyari kung saan three candidates can corner between 75 to 90% of the prospective votes. That will be an interesting kind of scenario. We're looking at which is increasingly probable, especially if tuloy-tuloy ito yung bahit na duda dun sa viability ng Marcos camp, because the Marcos camp has to really quash these petitions of disqualification as soon as possible para wala ng bahit ng duda. But it's possible na actually magde-drag on ito, like what happened with the campaign of Grace Poe in 2016. So if that happens, then that puts ISKO in a strong position to pick up numbers and supporters from the Bongbong Marcos or BBM Sara kind of team, no, including some supporters of Sara who wanted her to run for the presidency. So this is where the race becomes more fluid, more unpredictable, and in my opinion, perhaps more interesting kasi there'll be more pressure on different candidates to do it. Alright? Okay, so this is the summary. Okay, balik tayo. May question pa kayo dyan bago tayo babalik sa ating day jobs? Yeah. Kamusta ba kayo dyan? Richman, Zapanta, Eric, kamusta? Thank you for joining us, Eric. Chona, thank you very much for nice comments, right? Very kind of you. Oo, nasa Gaib, is that correct? I think pauwi na sila ISKO mamaya or tomorrow, I think by the latest. Hanggang Tuesday ata siya sa Cebu. Yes, I think ISKO wants to really secure the one Cebu. May pagka-Florida swing vote ng Cebu. I'm not saying one Cebu really controls the entire, I don't think it's 100% super solid block. But it can give you still a significant number of support, no? Kasi alam natin may mga ibang Cebu stalwarts who supported naman Lenny, diba? So, nonetheless, ang strategy ni ISKO is to get Gwen Garcia behind him and one Cebu. So in that sense, palakasin niya sarili niya talaga sa parts of his size where he's doing relatively well. And then consolidate his strength dito sa NCR. And then, if he becomes the bet of the administration, then he can pick up his numbers in Mindanao kung saan medyo mahina-hina siya. So in that sense, ISKO could push up his numbers all the way to 20-25%, right? From the ISKO camp, they want to make this race between themselves and BBM. But because both sides are kind of going to be aligned to administration one way or another, that misses the point whereby at least a third of potential prospective voters are leaning more towards the opposition, right? Or much more radical departure from the status quo. So that's where Lenny can come in and keep her numbers at between 20-30% if she maintains the kind of momentum she has now and improves on the messaging and all base dun sa mga suggestions na binigay natin. Kasi diba, pinag-usapan natin in the previous Meta Live na si Lenny, yung sincerity factor andun sa advertisements niya, but I think the cool factor, the inspirational factor, medyo dapat i-build up pa, no? While I think ISKO and BBM have been doing better there. Yeah. Again, by the way, this is just analysis of political advertisement. This is not a judgment on the character of the candidates per se or their supporters, right? Just to be clear about that, yeah. Krisha, ako ba yung ano mo? Ako, di ayaw mo, di ano? Oh. Ayan. At least dito maraming mga supporters of different sides. Kamusta kayo dyan? Rach, salamat for the star. Salamat for the star, Marvin. Very kind of you. Oh, again, snapshot lang to. Hindi ko sinasabi this will be the situation after 1 month. This could change again within few weeks or not. But probably, ang basa ko is this will be the situation heading into January. No? So parang feeling ko, until end of this year, this will be the case. Whereby, roughly, it's a kind of a three-way race with Bongbong Marcos still as a front runner. Again, unless some crazy plot twist happen, no? But mukhang yun ang nakikita natin, ang state of play heading into elections, formal campaign, no? Next year sa January onwards, no? Yeah. Kamusta dyan kay Lazy? Tama ba yan, Lazy? Shout out, okay. Sir Key, on the vice presidential candidates, actually, interesting din yung VP race, no? It's just that I have to research more and look at more numbers to be able to definitively give you better analysis. Siyempre, I can say whatever. But, siyempre, gusto naman natin na ayan na yung mga, editors ko. So, actually, this week, I have at least 3 articles lined up about ISKO, centrism, and actually how this could affect the race, no? So, kasi previous week, analysis ko talaga, sila Duterte, Sara, wala. They're on downward trajectory. Marcos is gonna emerge as frontrunner. Tama tayo sa prediction natin dyan. Now, the next analysis we're gonna make is that potentially ISKO could have a surge and this could actually make the race more fluid and unpredictable. So, yun ang mga next analysis na makikita nyo. At saka yung comparisons with Macron and aspects of technocratic populism. Yan ang din pinag-usapan natin. So, let's do around 5 to 10 minutes feedback and discussion, then I'll go back to mga editors ko and all, may mga sinisend sila sa akin. Alright. Dun sa VP, well, it's an interesting race in many ways. Let's see how Senator Kiko Pangilinan, right, tries to make liberalism more cool and acceptable in the Philippines after all of these years of anti-liberal bashing and propaganda and fake news and etc. And of course, the legitimate concerns that were raised with liberal reformism. Si Willie Ong is not doing as bad as some of his critics were saying. I think statistically tight sila ni Kiko, so not too bad for someone who never held a political office, right? Although, may mga nagsabi siguro kung tumakbo siya for Senate, he had better chance, no? But, he's not doing too bad. So I think Taich at third, if I'm not mistaken. Sara is kind of like around 20+%, half of Soto. But I won't be surprised if Tito Soto's numbers will a little bit come down and others will a little bit come up. So it could also tighten up like the presidential race. Pero mas kutob ko na maging tighter yung presidential kaysa yung vice presidential race. Again, I could be completely wrong on this because I don't know that much yet about the vice presidential race as much ng dynamics niya, no? So, pasensya na kung medyo focus tayo dun sa presidential. Too much, probably, no? And then, of course, you have Congressman and Professor Walden Bello entering the vice presidential race. That will be very interesting. Guns blazing din yan si Prof. Bello. Naging prof din namin yan sa UP. Of course, he has been an intellectual mentor throughout the years. So yun, I'll just be honest about that. So disclosure. So I'm very interested. I'm very excited about the debates dun sa vice presidential race. Tignan natin anong mangyari dyan, no? And then I still have to look at parang kulang yung interviews siguro nila Lacson and Pacquiao din eh. Parang si ISKO parati nakikita ko na interview. And the Lenington communication and BBM is very strong. Pero siguro would be nice if the media also covers more, no? Lacson, Pacquiao, and also Calyodi. So I follow them, some of them online. Especially, among the others I mentioned, also Calyodi. I am seeing where Calyodi is going across the country, etc. A part of me was saying, because I was giving a lecture in Sao Paulo University in Brazil, and I said, Calyodi could have been the Lula of the Philippines, had the Philippines had similar kind of a strong manufacturing base and labor union culture that Brazil has had, no? But it's a very different context. Nonetheless, kudos, no, to all of these other candidates that are not as much discussed, but they're doing their job going across the country under very difficult circumstances, no. And tingnan natin si Sara, no. Honestly, I mean, I haven't heard Sara speak that much or as much, perhaps. So let's see also how Sara is gonna project herself as vice presidential and how is she gonna position herself in a much more neutral ground, because of course nakita natin mga Duterte, especially Sara, they're very comfortable when they're among their supporters, very energetic, vivacious among others. But let's see how is she gonna perform once she's in a debate, no, and gonna come under criticism, because Sara could become essentially, no, siya yung atakin for every shortcomings of President Duterte, kasi siya yung anak, di ba? So yun yung magiging attack sa kanya, right? Si Soto, actually I see huge continuities between Soto's style of politics, Tito Soto, hindi Vico Soto, and Poe and ISKO. To be honest, I see ISKO more as a continuation of Poe ERAP kind of populism than actually Dutertismo kind of populism, just to be honest about this. I see more continuity between Marcosian and Dutertismo populism. And I see more continuity between ISKO populism and the kind of centrist Poe populism and also ERAP populism. So yun. So I kind of differentiate among them. Different variants kasi yan. You have to, so hindi pwede na sabihin ng populist, they're all the same. Actually, there are varieties of populism. So we have to also analyze that, right? At yun, pinag-usapan natin yung mga classics in terms of classification of different populism. At saka, I came up also with my own versions, no, or my own twist, no. Polite populism, for instance, yung term ko kay ISKO Moreno. Although, medyo maangas na naman si ISKO recently and all. Pero, I mean, it's still a huge difference from President Duterte's positioning back in 2016 elections. Alright. May ibang tanong pa ba dyan? Yeah, yung criticism sa ISKO camp, nakikita ko yung sinasabi nyo. Let's just not forget, this is what centrist politics is all about, diba? Kung titignan niyo yung so siguro tomorrow pag-usapan natin si Margaret Thatcher and Merkel, because they're kind of the polar opposites of European politics and global politics in a sense, because si Margaret Thatcher yung principled conviction politics, although many would say her conviction politics was disastrous for Britain dun sa mga new liberal policies niya, dun sa foreign policy niya on Hong Kong, on South Africa, etc. And then Merkel, actually criticism kay Angela Merkel is that masyado siyang nagsiswing siya, no? So ang ginagawa ni Angela Merkel, Chancellor Merkel of Germany, she'll get policies from Social Democrats, from liberals, from Greens and all, and put them together. So, she was always the kind of a person who would oversee compromise and synthesize different seemingly contradictory positions. So Merkel actually is the kind of a mother of modern 21st century centrism, and it kind of worked in Germany in one way or another. She's the most admired German leader since probably Konrad Adenauer, right? Or who knows? I mean, and if you look at the great German leader, Prussian leader Bismarck, he was also accused of being paiba-iba. But actually what he was doing is that putting all of these elements together. So yan, pag-usapan natin tomorrow yan. Because, ang gusto ko naman pag-usapan dito is medyo comparative analysis and all. Of course, no two countries are similar. Maraming differences between Philippines and France and Europe, etc. But I think in comparison, we may pick up a point or two. And I think comparison has actually helped me to come up with some of my better analysis and sometimes even accurate predictions about what's happening in the Philippines, no? Kasi hindi naman tayo isolated. What happens here is affected by what happens there. Tingnan niyo, si Duterte, kapanahon niya, Brexit, Trump, etc. It's a globalized world. So we have to know a little bit about other countries. So pag-usapan natin yan tomorrow, hopefully. Si Margaret Thatcher, si Merkel, and then kind of connect ko yan kay Macron and ISKO, and then the pros and cons of that, no? So I think that's how we have to understand 21st century politics. Alright? Okay? Alright, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Again, I'm not endorsing a particular style of politics or not. Ang pinapakita ko lang dito is mga pros and cons, risks, rewards, at saka yung mga motivations behind some of the policy positions that are happening there. Of course, if you want to really know my personal position, well, off the record, behind the scenes na tayo mag-usap. But my job here as a public educator is, try to give the most objective, evidence-based, non-partisan possible analysis. Possible, because tao lang naman ako, di ba? Possible. And minsan nakikita naman sa facial reactions ko, lalo kung medyo, eto na naman tayo di ba? But, ayaw naman natin na purong judgmental, personalan yung usapan, di ba? Gusto naman natin matinong analysis. Yeah. So yun, I'm interested. You have Calyodi, you have, Professor Bello, you have all of these very fiery people in the race. You also have, people from across the political spectrum, from the center, from the left, on the right, marami sila. Maraming gusto maging admin bet, Bongbong Marcos, ISKO. So let's see how this is gonna play out. It's much more interesting perhaps than many people assume, no? And hopefully dun sa global media mas makikita nila yung aspect na yun. So what I'm trying to do is to explain this to the world. Na hindi lang ito Marcos Duterte axis or kind of competition. There are more other players, no? So you can check, for instance, my Straits Times column 3-4 months ago when I said, by the way, there are other candidates, and I mentioned ISKO, Pacquiao, Poe, etc. So in a way, I'm being proven right, especially if magkakaroon ng surge si ISKO, which I think is more and more likely. But again, if you're opposition, you should not necessarily be unhappy with this because that could actually blow the race much more open and competitive. All right, maraming salamat. Thank you very much. Thank you for bothering to listen to me dun sa mga hundreds of people who are tuning in live. Thank you very much and shout out sa inyong lahat, no? Thank you very much for watching. God bless po. Yan. Salamat Pau for coming in. Ayan, paalis na tayo. Panoorin niyo na lang yung recap.